Hello and welcome to week 4, day 2 or day 14 of reporting Depp v Heard. We are outside Fairfax County Court, as you can see, and behind me, for reasons that I really don't quite yet understand, I've got a documentary film crew maker. Give us a little wave. There you go. And he does, and he keeps the camera steady. What a pro. So today was a interesting day. The queue was down on yesterday, but still very busy. I managed to get into court and also managed to fulfill some duties for my visa sponsor, Channel 5 News, who are taking a renewed interest in this case simply because we're not far away from seeing Amber Heard take the stand. But she didn't do that yesterday. However, we got the first of her witnesses, but not before something very dramatic happened. I'm not going to take you through it myself because I have a rather superb park bench guest, Liz, who attended court for the first time today. She's been a podcast listener since we started putting them out before the trial, and decided that having listened to enough of this, she was going to come and see what it was like to be in court herself. She queued up and got into the main court, and these are her reflections on the day. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another Park Bench interview, a debrief of week 4, day 2 of this trial, or day 14 if you're counting, with my new friend.
15? Day 15?
Liz. 15?
15.
Come on, are we going to count this?
I think it's 15.
No.
I can pull it up on my phone where your
Look,
last
we're
podcast was
Tuesday,
14.
aren't we? And we've had 12 days in the first 3 weeks, if you include jury selection.
Okay.
12, 13, 14. We're on 14. Oh my God, if we're arguing about which day we're on, how is the rest of this conversation going to go?
No, well, probably.
All right, take your time. Do you want to prove your point?
I'm going to prove my point.
Right.
Because I'm an American and I have to prove my point.
4 days a week for the last 3 weeks, that's 12. Plus yesterday, 13. Tuesday today is 14.
Okay.
That's because there was a preview
Yes.
episode.
Yes, there was.
So
Okay.
the numbers of the podcast, Reporting Depp v Heard, thank you for giving me the opportunity to plug it.
On
The
Spotify.
numbers of the podcast on Spotify and all your usual podcast platforms is on 15 because I did a preview episode.
Fair enough. I'm wrong, and I can admit when I'm wrong.
Right. Glad we've got to the starting line. Liz, just tell me about why you're here, first of all.
So there's actually a couple of reasons why I'm here. The first one being that I have been following this trial for the entire time it's been going on. From my phone, at work, at home, in the car, just absorbing it all. And in the days where I wasn't able to watch as much, I looked for a podcast about it, and yours was the only one that came up. I know. And I really liked the way you came at it, and I was like, you know what? I want to go see what it's all about. So I had a day off today.
Because you're from Virginia, aren't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I live
You haven't come as far as me.
40 minutes. No.
No. But
No. I think, well, actually, I think the woman from Australia wins.
I know she does, doesn't she? Jacinta. Yeah, I want to actually interview Jacinta on the park bench, but I haven't seen her for the last couple of days, actually. But yeah, so you just decided that you were going to come along and see what was going on for yourself.
You know, I'm one of those people who I agree with you. Like, we need to come at this from an unbiased, absolutely objective point of view and get to hear what they have to say, and it's why I've been absorbing all the information, and I really liked the way you came at it, so I wanted to come and meet you and thank you in person for...
Well, it's a genuine honour to have you on my park bench.
It's an honor to be on. It's an honor to be on the park
Thank
bench.
you. Yeah, I say my park bench. We're just sort of borrowing it from Fairfax County Court.
They don't mind.
They don't mind. I'm sure they don't mind. They haven't kicked us off yet. Right then. So you've done a lot of research. You've done a lot of listening, a lot of reading, and a lot of viewing. What conclusions had you come to before today?
His team did very, very well in presenting a case that says she was an aggressor and that he was a victim, and that if there was any mutual abuse, as was testified by, was it Dr. Anderson was her name?
Yes, Dr. Anderson.
You know, that was a result of one coming in hot, the other one matching that energy, and that's fair to a degree. There's just been so much evidence presented for his side that now we're going to get her side of things, and we're going to get her witnesses, and that's going to be interesting.
Well, it is, and it's going to be difficult listening, I would imagine. Let's just rattle through the last of the 2 Johnny Depp witnesses that we heard this morning. So we finished off with Erin Filati,
Yep.
Who was examined by Johnny Depp's side, and she listed a lot of the things that Amber Heard had reported to her, such as her substance abuse, her dysfunctional family growing up, and the conditions that she suffered from. And the one thing that stuck out for me was the cocaine abuse. She self-reported cocaine abuse, which we haven't heard much of, but it appears to have been a real problem for her at one stage. And so that's noteworthy as a journalist. You always look to that sort of thing. And then the second chap, it was Mr. Spinkler, the forensic accountant, who gave a very short presentation.
Oh yes, it was short and actually very lively for what it was. Like, I was surprised.
He seemed to be enjoying himself, didn't he? But his basic point was that Johnny Depp had lost £40 million worth of opportunities, 22.5 million of which was Pirates 6, as a result of the op-ed. And then when he was cross-examined, the cross-examination said, well, you didn't actually link it to the op-ed, you just calculated that this is how much money he'd lost. And he was kind of like, yeah. So I'm not quite sure what the point of it was. How did you read it?
So as I have with a lot of the things that have happened in cross-examinations from the Depp witnesses, I read it as Ben Rottenborn doing what Ben Rottenborn does best and getting that clickbait, that soundbite that the American media is so fond of.
Right.
And then just canceling everything out.
Actually, well, this takes us on to the move to strike. So there was drama.
Oh my God.
Was this just before lunch?
This was just before lunch.
So,
just before lunch.
So go on, explain what happened.
So there had been some speculation this morning while we were all in queue saying we think they're going to move to strike today. In American courts, that's not totally uncommon before the second half gets presented.
Explain it for a British viewer. What is a move to strike?
Basically, it says they have not presented, and the plaintiff in this case, the accuser, has not created enough evidence in the testimony presented thus far to say for sure that their side is correct, and
or even has a case.
Right.
Yeah. So therefore, we, the defence, want you basically to throw this case out before we have to present a defence.
Yeah. Because why should we have to present a defense if we have nothing to defend against? But I believe, based on the information that I have seen over the last several weeks, there's plenty of evidence there for Johnny Depp's case that says, no, we have evidence here. And they were basing it, because the whole case is based on one thing and one thing alone. It's the op-ed. And the op-ed, according to Rottenborn and Choose, there's 3 very distinct points of the op-ed that are being contested here. Yeah. And so Rottenborn gets up and tries to explain it away and say, this is blah, 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 and move to strike, and this is not going anywhere in his Ben Rottenborn fashion.
Yeah.
And in the middle of it, Choose gets up and he's like, I can argue now, can I?
It was really interesting actually seeing Ben Chew in full flow, because we haven't really seen that yet.
I loved it.
And he went on a rhetorical flourish that made his point very eloquently. But I think, the point about move to strike is it's chancing your arm a little bit, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because for a judge to say, no, I am not going to let a jury decide this case, there has to be pretty overwhelming evidence, I would say, for a judge to go, right, that's the path I'm going to take. And as was kind of expected, Judge Penny Azkarate decided that no, there was the two of the 3 objections failed, and one was a kind of technical one.
There was not enough evidence presented to
her to make a decision.
Yeah, for her to make the decision that the first point is a success in terms of getting this thing thrown away.
And she said she was going to have to take advice on it, but I don't think there's any doubt that this is now going to roll on, because we've now started Amber Heard's evidence. Not Amber Heard herself, but her choice of witnesses. And the first witness was a forensic psychologist.
Another
forensic psychologist, Dr. Dawn Hughes. And Dr. Dawn Hughes, amazingly, came up with a diagnosis and a conclusion about this case, and specifically about Amber Heard, that exactly matched what Amber Heard wanted her to conclude.
Exactly.
In exactly the same way that Dr. Shannon Curry 8 days ago came up with exactly the same diagnosis that Johnny Depp wanted her to conclude.
You know what's funny is I remember watching Shannon Curry's testimony on the witness stand.
And she was impressive.
She was very impressive. And this is something we all kind of were like talking about, was that if put these 2 people side by side, we all came to an agreement, and I concur, that Shannon Curry just felt more credible than Dawn Hughes does.
Okay.
The biggest reason for that has been the way in which that Dawn Hughes needed her notes in a way that Shannon Curry didn't. And at times she was reading from those notes, which she wasn't supposed to be doing, but it very much so appeared like she was. And
well, her point was that she didn't want this to be a memory test, because that's not the point of giving evidence. The point of giving evidence is giving evidence.
it almost felt like it was going back to like the whole Alejandro Romero thing, where he was like, I said I don't remember because I don't remember. He didn't read any of the statements that were given to him to read before his deposition. He admitted it under oath.
Yeah.
But
Alejandro Romero is a doorman, and this is an appointed expert
Right.
to the court, so it's a
I
different
feel like
level of magnitude.
I feel like she should have reviewed her notes and had that ready the way that Shannon Curry did.
Fair enough, and that's obviously a valid perspective. I think one of the things that struck me, I thought she was very fluent, I thought she was very engaging in the same way that Shannon Curry was very engaging. I thought she answered the questions that were put to her, but I thought, I'm so glad that forensic psychologists are not in charge of the electricity supply or building rockets to Mars, because opinions are clearly important, and the more qualifications and the more scientific rigor you apply to them, opinions become more important. But at the end of the day, they're still opinions, and they seem to be essentially opinions for hire.
And it's so objective, or non-objective rather. There was a question asked of Shannon Curry and Cross by, I believe it was Ben Shoes.
Yeah, I think.
Where he said,
testing my memory, but
was
yes.
it Ben Shoes or no, it was, I'm sorry, it was not. It was in Cross, so it was Brett Hoff.
Right.
She said, if you had not come to the results that Johnny Depp and his team wanted, would you be sitting here today? Obviously, there was an objection for speculation, rightfully so.
But it's a valid question.
Yes, but it's a speculative question, and the problem with it is that it got overruled.
Yeah. But I think
But now we're going to have to go through the same thing. We're going to have to.
I mean, would Dr. Hughes have been picked as a forensic psychologist for Amber Heard had she not come up with exactly the same conclusions that Amber Heard wanted it to?
And
it always feels like something of a farce, because they cancel each other
it
out.
does.
In
It is.
the UK, expert witnesses have to write a document of agreement, which they present to the judge. And the judge goes, right, okay, this is what both sides, independent forensic experts, agree about this case. And then they have to also do documents of disagreement, but the idea is that they get to a point where they can deliver something to the judge that the judge can actually make a ruling on. In this case, you've got the poor jury who are going, well, I've got one person who is absolutely convincing and brilliant and says all the right things in favour of one party, and then someone who you say wasn't as convincing, but from where I was sitting was just as convincing and just as experienced and just as well qualified, saying the absolute opposite.
Well, and I agree that she's fully qualified based on her qualifications. My issue was just the way in which she was like having a hard time like with her cheat sheet and all that. Like I get that you need the cheat sheet, and every time there was an objection and they went into sidebar and it was like, okay, that's cool.
But I mean, let's get to the actual crux of what she was saying. She's absolutely convinced that Amber Heard does not have histrionic personality disorder, does not have borderline personality disorder, has got PTSD, was a victim of sexual and domestic violence by Johnny Depp, and it fits with the rest of her diagnoses about the way that she grew up and all that sort of thing. So what did you make of that actual evaluation?
It's interesting because there's a part of my brain that, again, this is the logical side of my brain going, which test did she take first? Did she go in for her examination with Curry first or with Hughes first?
Do you know what? That's a really good question.
And the reason because it was something
we can find out because it's all in the testimony.
Again, it was one of those things where as we're going through.
Why do you think that's important then?
Because as somebody who has taken psychological evaluations in the past, admittedly,
I knew you'd be a good guest.
Admittedly, you know, if you've taken that test before and gotten a result, and then you go and take that same test again.
Did you learn how to game the test, maybe?
And I'm not saying she did. I'm trying to remain as objective and as obviously I feel like Johnny should win this case just based on the evidence that has been presented, but we haven't gotten the full case yet.
So your mind is open if you hear more evidence?
I am absolutely open to prove me wrong, as we learned. And so I'd be interested to know which test she took first, and because they were the exact same tests, I think there was one that
similar
Curry
tests.
used, like the Minnesota versus the there was a lot of tests.
They weren't sadly, they weren't all exactly the same
Right,
tests, 'cause
they
that
did.
would have been really interesting.
There was like a good handful that were the same
Yeah,
tests.
yeah.
And so I'd be interested to know who she took first. Was it Curry's or was it Hughes? And I feel that would help me to better understand why these two results on these same tests were so vastly different.
How much are you looking forward to seeing Amber Heard on the stand?
I'm so excited. The biggest reason I want to see Amber Heard on the stand is I want to see if some of that, look, as somebody who, again, I've gone through psychological profiling for different things. I have been diagnosed with mental illnesses. I know what that's like. I too have PTSD from things in my past, and I know that sometimes if I get pushed too hard, I snap. And that is a PTSD trigger. And if that is something that is going on with Amber Heard, I'm curious to see if she can hold it together, or if she's gonna crack on the witness stand. I thought Johnny did a really good job of, kind of controlling the flow of his testimony in the sense that he was even able to joke around. And as his testimony went further along in his 4 or 5 days of testimony,
It was 4 calendar days, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think 3 days in total, but over 4 days.
yeah, he was very reserved at the beginning, and as he sort of let a lot of this trauma off his chest and let this very personal part of himself be released to the public and be released to public worlds, you noticed he loosened up more and more. The jokes got better and better. He was very
his
personal.
flow, because he
Yeah.
started off very, very
He
slowly,
really-
but he warmed up, didn't he?
And as somebody who's had trauma that they've repressed for so many years, and finally you talk about it and you feel free. I saw that moment for Johnny Depp. I saw it in his face. And it was one of those things where, it took like a day. Like he finished one day and the next day he came back and he seemed different to me. He seemed a little bit more lively. Like maybe he'd let some of this.
I've noticed that. See, this is the thing, and also I noticed that the American public has responded to that, because the moment that he felt he'd crossed a Rubicon for whatever reason, whether it was within himself or what he was hearing in court or the way it was being presented, the American public seemed to pick up on this, and there's been this huge sort of groundswell of I think support for Johnny Depp. What is going to be interesting is over the next few days whether or not that changes, whether the narrative changes, whether Amber Heard in court and this new PR team that she's hired can make any indent on that outside of court. Because as I was saying yesterday, I try and just focus on what's happening in court, but I think that is impossible with this case. I've almost, you can't do that. You have to take a knowledge and awareness of what is happening outside of this. I know the jury's decision is going to be really, really important.
Oh yeah.
But this is also about the court of public opinion, and you'd be foolish not to understand how those things are sort of intertwined.
Yeah. If he can get the court of public opinion back on his side, I think his career comes back enough to where he gains back some of the public respect that he lost.
And also enough of his truth having got out there for those people who want to believe him, who believe him, to say that they've seen enough to continue supporting him. And Amber Heard's got a job on her hands if she wants to do the same for her, because I think enough detail has come out about their relationship over the course of the last 2, 3, 4, 6 years.
Yeah.
To do them both some damage,
and
a lot of damage.
Yeah, and at the very beginning, like there was that initial, like the op-ed came out and all of this started to flow, and it was like, holy crap, this guy that we all thought was so wonderful, and all these reports and all these rumors, he would dress up in his Jack Sparrow costume, not get paid for it, go to children's hospitals, and he would go to Disney undercover dressed as Jack Sparrow, again, not getting paid a dime to do this, just to make people happy. Like, this doesn't sound like the man that Amber Heard is accusing him of being. And I'm like, so there's that moment of like, oh my God, was he playing all of us all along? And I had that moment for about a day and a half. He was fired from Pirate 6. He was fired from Grindelwald, from Fantastic Beasts. And I went, well, I mean, if he truly did that, that's fair. Like, that's good. And then it kind of started to come out more and more that, like, that's not true. And it's like, well, we jumped the gun here. It was almost like the Me Too movement went too far.
It is fascinating, and I think we're right on the cusp of something really interesting now, because we've just heard a load of testimony from an expert who clearly believes not only that Amber Heard is telling the truth, but also that it's backed up by scientific evaluation. And whether more and more, I mean, that's not a revelation, that's an evaluation.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. But whether more revelations will come out that actually convince both the American public and the jury that there is any substance to what she's saying.
Yeah.
Because of course documentary evidence of any abuse doesn't exist. People who've been abused will say that often it doesn't exist because it happens behind closed doors. But you know, that's where we are with this. I've taken the view that we'll never know. I've taken the view that we will never know.
We can't know what happens behind closed doors.
Exactly. We weren't there, so we don't know whether it's true. But
in his own words, were you there?
Yeah, but then it kind of spins out into, well, in that case, what does a court make of it? What does an expert make of it? What does a jury make of it? What does the media make of it? What do the public make of it? It's we're all trying to make something of something that is ultimately unknowable, which makes this both fascinating and extraordinarily frustrating at the same time.
Oh yeah, and the like secret recordings that she did of him and stuff that actually made her look worse than him. Some of those audio clips that have come out and the footage of him beating up the cabinets in his own house, like, if that makes a person abusive, then I think we're all a little abusive because...
My takeaway from today is that you can make forensic psychology up to give you whatever answer
Yes, you
want.
can. You can pay anybody any amount of money to say whatever you need them to say.
I would love to get a forensic psychologist on the podcast or on my YouTube channel to explain to me how you can have two very well respected, currently practicing forensic psychologists approved by the courts and licensed to practice can look at one person extensively and the same material and come to two diametrically opposite conclusions. I would love to, it's an open invitation for any forensic psychologist.
It's really easy to get on this park bench. You just show up at court, you find
no application
Nick.
Process.
There really isn't. I happened to find him in the cafeteria and be like, hey man, you're pretty much the reason I'm here. Thank you for what you're doing. And he was like, you want to come be on the park?
Got you. Liz, thank you so much for coming on. I really, no,
I'm just messing with you.
Lovely woman, and I you know, flattery does go a long way there. I do appreciate you coming on and giving us your perspective.
Thank you for letting me come here, and thank you for doing what you're doing, because it's absolutely something we don't get in America. We don't get this unbiased, absolutely objective journalism anymore, and I, for one, am enjoying this breath of fresh air that you are.
Well,
and the accent doesn't hurt.
Thank you. I'm doing my best, but I'm also realizing that everyone comes to something with some levels of assumption at the very least, and trying to sort of take my assumptions out of this has been a really instructive process as well. So I'm loving being in America, and I'm loving getting all the feedback that I'm getting for what I'm doing.
Welcome to Virginia, my friend. We're crazy here.
My thanks there to Liz for the park bench interview. She isn't going to be around for a bit, but she hopes to come back after the break and maybe do one more day before the end of this trial. We've got 2 more weeks and 2 days to go. Before I disappear, I want to introduce you to a remote park bench interviewee. His name is John Davis. He is a semi-retired lawyer, and he's also a fervent supporter of the men's rights movement. And he was introduced to me by a mutual contact who is taking a very considerable interest in this case and thinks it could have all sorts of implications, partly depending on the result, but also just watching the narrative as it comes out into the media. And he recommended that I speak to John. And so yesterday I had a wee chat with John, and this is the result. First of all, John, thank you very much indeed for spending the time to talk to me about this extraordinary trial and the various cultural and legal fault lines which are running through it.
Nick, it's my pleasure and my privilege, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Very kind of you to say so. In terms of the legal side of things, this is a straightforward defamation trial, or is it? What's your take on what we've seen now we're into week 4?
It's a difficult case for many reasons, and I'm actually very respectful of Johnny Depp's attorneys for being able to get this to trial. The case, there's no such thing as a straightforward case. If it goes to trial, it's almost guaranteed that a case is not straightforward, that there are defenses to the allegations, and that the allegations are probably true to at least some extent. The proof here is whether Amber Heard lied to the public about Johnny Depp in a context that was a proximate cause of injury to Johnny economically and otherwise. In some states, you can get compensation for emotional injuries that are definitely something that Johnny testified to. So it's not straightforward because, as in many cases involving intimacy, much of the evidence is only within the minds of the two participants to the domestic violence or sexual assault in this case, which Amber Heard has accused him of. So it's a matter of very carefully and meticulously putting together witnesses, which you've seen Johnny do for the last 10 days, that will be able to provide circumstantial evidence that's solid, that shows that there's a high probability that Johnny is telling the truth.
Well, we've got
I'm going to stop there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we've got to the turning point in the trial, haven't we? Because we're going to start seeing Amber Heard's witnesses take the stand very shortly, and Amber Heard herself, possibly even this week. And this is tied up with the counterclaim that Amber Heard has brought against Johnny Depp, also for defamation, saying that her reputation has been shattered by the articles that he, through his representatives, leaked into the media since he launched this legal action against her. Just before we start talking about the success or otherwise of both parties' strategies, tell me where this can end up, because the jury of 7 eventually are going to have to make a decision on both the claim and the counterclaim. What are the possible options for them?
Well, there are many. One, they can deny Johnny any relief and award Amber $100 million or more. That's really up to their discretion. In a state like Virginia, there's no limit on how much they can award as a jury.
So is the amount that each party is suing each other for nominal? Because Johnny Depp's suing for around 50 million and Amber Heard's suing for around 75. Is that nominal? They could get more than that.
They could get more than that. I wouldn't say it was nominal, but that's more metaphorical.
Right.
That's about what Johnny's experts think he was damaged economically. Plus, they're asking for what we call exemplary or punitive damages, and I forgot the term in the UK that's used for it. And that is where somebody does something so bad or evil that the jury decides they want to punish that person and cause them to pay more to compensate Johnny for his emotional troubles over this, and his attorneys, or vice versa. They award it to Amber because they feel that Johnny has done something very wrong in the context of this whole scenario.
Does it end up a clear conclusion? Is it the case that if the claim succeeds, the counterclaim automatically fails, and vice versa? And how does that affect the amount of money that the jury could award? Because I'm told that if the jury think Amber Heard or Johnny Depp get over the line, but only just, they could award them as little as $1 in damages.
Absolutely. That's called the nominal award. And that happens more often than people might think, where the jury says, yes, she lied, but we're only going to give you $1, just so that you know that we know and everybody should know that she lied. And the same thing can happen on her counterclaim. In a case like this, you really have to see all of the evidence before you can really make an evaluation. At this point, I think the majority of the jury believes Johnny and accepts Johnny's side of the story. But
you can't know that, John, can you?
Yes, because it's usual in trials for a good presentation, as Johnny's attorneys have made, to have the jury side with the evidence that they've heard so far. Now, what Amber's attorneys are going to try to do is impeach Johnny's evidence, and they're going to try to introduce all kinds of testimony and probably documents that they think says, well, Johnny's version of it and that of his witnesses is not accurate or correct. Okay. And
could both claims succeed? Sorry to interrupt. Could both claims succeed?
Sure.
Could Johnny Depp prove defamation by Amber Heard and Amber Heard prove defamation by Johnny Depp?
Yes. In this context of this case, Amber would have a much harder time proving defamation on the part of Johnny. Johnny has kept silent, and unless they have evidence of his publicity agents having gone out and actively and willfully tried to disseminate false information, she's not going to have any case against him. Even if his publicity agents did release information into the media, if it's all true, it's an absolute defense to any claim she has for libel or defamation or slander.
So the other side of the coin is that both parties could lose this. The jury could make a
That's true.
decision against both of them. Wow. I mean, I didn't quite realize how many implications there are for this case.
There are a lot of implications. There are also a lot of benefits to the public from this case.
Yeah,
What we're
no. Well,
seeing,
let's talk about that, because you
win or lose.
obviously,
Okay.
yeah, but, you're an important figure in the men's rights movement, and I know that the men's
Sure.
rights movement is watching this case very, very closely. So tell me about the wider benefits as you see them.
Well, the benefits are that for the last 50 years, US media, and I've traveled widely abroad, I'm going to say a lot of media in a lot of countries, have been stirred up with a kind of moral hysteria over sex and intimate partners conduct in the context of domestic relations. And a lot of that is because Hollywood and the media have been exploiting, especially men in the media, as being violent and hypersexual and abusive of women and things of that nature. It's more prominent against men than certainly against women in the media. And so what we're seeing is a public reaction to that. And we're seeing
in this trial.
Sure, in this trial. We're seeing people immediately having jumped to conclusions about Johnny 2 or 3 years ago, which arguably caused quite a bit of damage. I've seen enough evidence now to know that he has a good claim for being damaged from her lies if the jury finds she lied. Okay, so I think should not be done with his case yet. He should have more evidence, and I'm sure he will. The difficulty you run into is that the jury doesn't have to decide things like a lawyer would decide them. They can decide the case for many, many reasons. One might be compassion for Johnny or Amber. And I mean that in a sincere sense. I have a lot of respect for juries. I've had many jury trials, and it's a very, very difficult task. These people in the courtroom have a heavy burden in this case. But
yes, because
notwithstanding
libel is a very high bar in the United States.
Sure.
But I understand, and I've spoken to enough women actually who say that they see this as showing that men can be victims, and that men, even
Yes.
powerful men in relationships, can be victims, which is, I wouldn't say quite anathema, but it certainly goes against the grain of what we've been hearing over the last 20, 30 years.
It goes against the stereotypes.
It goes against the stereotypes. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've had to do is just understand that I may have come with a load of baggage to this story, which I thought were assumptions that were legitimate. But it turns out that many people who are following this trial and supporting Johnny Depp are wanting those assumptions challenged very, very strongly, because it's their lived experience.
The assumptions, yes. Whether Johnny or Amber wins or neither or both is not as important as the discussion in the public that this trial is sparking, that it's engaging among ordinary people who are for the first time seeing these stereotypes and cliches about domestic violence being perpetrated mostly by men, et cetera. That's just not true. And people
when you say mostly, because I think percentage wise that's a really important thing. Mm-hmm. You're not suggesting that women are the main perpetrators of domestic violence, are you?
Oh yes, there's a number of studies. You have to step away from the feminist research, because that's just what they call advocacy research. It's not credible. In the last 15 years, there have been objective gender neutral studies done blind as to the gender of the participant parties. And in fact, women initiate 70% of domestic violence. Okay.
Right. But why is it that more women die at the hands of men than men die at the hands of women then? Because men is pretty incontrovertible, isn't it?
Yeah. Women are most likely to be harmed in domestic violence when they attack the man and he defends himself. Okay. Because men are very capable of defending themselves. And a lot of what they say, well, so many men killed their wives last year. Well, yeah. And a lot of them, it was self-defense. And that if you think of a population of 365 million people in the United States, 30 men killing their wife and it being self-defense is not implausible. Okay, that's actually a reasonable number of men who kill in self-defense. Now
How
there
many
are
women
some
kill
men who
their
kill
partners in self-defense then?
if you take away the self-defense, well, the self-defense is a little different from something that we heard a lot about called abused woman syndrome, where they call it the woman snaps, and it claims that after years of abuse, she just decided to kill him. Okay. There have been several cases of those. As far as I know, none of those defenses have stood up on appeal. Okay. So that's a little bit different. Self-defense is if you're a woman, women more frequently use weapons than men in domestic violence. So they are
Right.
actually more effective. So if a woman comes up behind a man and hits him in the head with a brick and he spins around and, decides to subdue her and bangs her head in that struggle and that conflict, that's self-defense. Okay. May
Right.
sound like domestic violence because it's a man perpetrating it, but it is in fact self-defense. He's trying to restrain someone who's trying to harm him.
So what about a man who snaps under constant bombardment from a woman and kills her? What's that?
That does
How would you
happen.
describe that? Yeah.
That does happen. That's just plain murder. It depends, again, whether it's first degree, second degree, or third degree, depends
Yeah.
on whether he contemplated it or not. So it
I
does
just, I
happen.
mean,
It's
I
not
must
that-
admit,
not that
it does sound to me like you are saying that women are more violent in intimate partner relationships than men.
They are, and I do have the citations for that. Let me see. Can I? You want to give me
Well,
about
I
30
say,
seconds?
listen, John. I mean,
Okay.
look,
Go ahead. Yeah.
and I'm sure there are plenty of feminists that can quote statistics back at you saying, no, we've got the citations that show that that's just a load of baloney. But I'm really interested in the fact that you think this is the thing, this is really important, and you're turning
Yes.
conventional thinking on its head here. So,
Yes.
and I mean. But we know that more than 90% of men are responsible for all violent crime, don't we?
Yes and no. If you make adjustments, most of that is organized crime activity, men killing each other. So if you take the remainder, men are not overly injurious of women especially in terms of killing, especially if you add in children, because women kill 3 times as many children in the US as men do. Okay.
Right.
In terms of murders. So if you add in the children, women are about just as violent as men in terms of killing.
Okay, all right. Then let's take that as a starting point, that men are that women are just as violent as men. I'm not saying that I accept it, and I'm not saying that I'm an expert in this field, but let's take that as a starting point. What do we do about it?
Well, I think we need to make some honest inquiries into what causes violence among in the family environment. And a lot of that goes back to our abandonment of efforts to try to treat people for especially depression. Men who are clinically depressed are biologically often driven to violence, and it's not rational. It's not a rational act. We have a lot of school shootings, for instance, are often white boys. Well, why? Well, because they have access to psychiatric medication and psychiatric treatment. It's not the medicine that causes the violence, it's abrupt changes or improper dosages that cause the violence. And there's very few incidents of it, but it hits the front pages when it does occur. And I think we need to, as a group of humanity, get together and make some serious commitments to resolving these problems with science and medicine instead of just locking people up in prison, which certainly is the trend that has been here in the United States.
So is the message that men need help, not being castigated for what society perceives as their behavior?
Yeah, I've seen credible estimates like from the Innocent Project that close to 40% of the men currently in prison in the United States are simply mentally ill and may have committed what could be criminal acts, but did not have the ability to defend themselves from against the criminal justice system, and could have, and their violence or whatever they're incarcerated for could have been prevented with proper medical intervention. Um,
What's the starting point then?
well, I think the starting point is, first of all, piercing through all these false stereotypes about men being the violent gender. I think we need to recognize that it's a human condition and it's not gender specific. Anybody can be violent, women, men, children. And I think we need to take a look at it without trying to assess blame on people based on their demographics. It's not just black men or white men or men. It's not just women or black women or white women. Need to recognize that it's part of the human condition. And I think we have to make some enlightened efforts to apply neuroscience and psychiatry and recent developments in those fields to look for ways of helping people to prevent this violence as opposed to simply punishing people when it occurs.
And in terms of a cultural shift, I understand that you're part of a movement that wants to affect a cultural shift, but also, are you looking to change legislation? Are you looking to change the science, the behavioral science thinking around this? Where, or the education system? Where would you like to see changes being made, and what specifics could you point to?
Sure, I think it's got to start in the education system. Right now, we're educating people who claim credentials in psychology and psychiatry who really don't have a clue of recent scientific developments. Nick, there's the head of the Department of Psychiatry at Cambridge is Dr. Edward Bullmore, and he's written a recent book which incorporates all of the recent neuroscience and neurological developments in the brain and what causes violence and depression and much of psychotic episodes in people. And I think that type of objective scientific information is very, very helpful in addressing the problem of violence in any society, whether it's the UK or the US or anywhere else in the world. So we can hope that somehow these enlightened scientific principles and knowledge will make its way into our universities and into our institutions, as opposed to the mob mentality of, well, this is a bad person doing a bad thing. We have to take violence against that person. That's not helping the situation. I think violence is something that is personal to everybody who's involved in it, and it's crushing when we punish the people instead of trying to make the situation better. What happens is it's like a meteor hitting the water. By putting a man in prison for domestic violence when he's actually a victim of violence in many cases. Domestic violence is so harmful to the children and actually to the woman who is in the relationship as well, and all of his family members and things of that nature. We need to recognize that our drive as a species for vindictiveness toward those who we judge having done something wrong needs to be attenuated a little bit, and we need to spend more of our resources on preventing violence as opposed to simply addressing it with the criminal justice system.
I mean, those are very fine words, and it's hard to disagree with them. Although at the back of my mind, I'm thinking the whole time of how women are trained to fear men, that they are worried about walking home on their own at night, and there aren't that many female rapists. You know what I mean?
Well, no, there aren't in terms of forcible rape, but there aren't that many male rapists either. You may find this hard to believe, but for instance, in the UK, you're only talking about, I think, 180 convictions per year of violent rape. And the feminists in UK, for instance, will say, oh, well, that's because the police are letting 65,000 rapists go. That's just not true.
They do hold up the lack of rape convictions compared to complaints as a sign of the failings of our society.
It is. And you will find many of these delusional claims about rape in the feminist literature that's to the point of hysteria, where, well, okay, I feel bad, we had sex and I feel bad, and all of a sudden I didn't give him consent. And a lot of women will walk into the police station because they're encouraged to do that and say, I was raped. When the police will sit down and say, okay, let's get the specifics, they'll get up and walk out because, in fact, no real rape occurred. They just simply have regrets over sex. That's certainly not all of them. The UK is particularly affected by the hysteria. As I said, they have 5 times the rate of rape complaints per 100,000 people as the United States. And a lot of that has to do with British culture. British men and American men both are appalled by rape. They hate rape. Everybody does. Nobody wants to encourage or commit something called rape, except a few individuals. And they are by far the vast majority of men. In terms of women being afraid, there's no doubt in my mind that the media is driving that fear to the point of hysteria. It's not justified. Yes, bad things happen. Certainly, we've all had bad things happen to us in life. That's part of life, and it's one of the risks that we encounter as human beings. But it doesn't mean that we have to live in fear, especially not of each other. A lot of the fear that women have toward men is the hatred of men generated by feminism that's reflecting back.
Feminism surely has achieved great things. It's got women out of being property of men. It's got women the vote. It's got a huge amount of equality for women. So I don't understand why the men's movement is so against feminism.
Well, everything you just said is not true when you look at history. Okay. And that's very difficult for someone in the UK to even begin to comprehend. I'm somewhat of an expert on the history of British law. It was part of my postdoctoral degrees in law. And if you look back, that's just not true that women were considered property. There may have been some editorials in newspapers that said something like that, but it's just not true.
So this concept of chattel didn't exist?
Yeah, no, it didn't. It really didn't. That's an invention of the feminists and actually goes back even to Roman law. It's a misinterpretation of Roman law and Roman customs, the concept of patriarchy, for instance.
But what about female emancipation? That was a feminist. That was the feminist campaign that brought the vote, wasn't it?
It's just not true. In England, there were for about 18 months there were restrictions on women voting, while the men were dying in the trenches in World War I. They weighted women's votes so that the woman's vote would not be unduly influenced by the fact that millions of men were dying in the trenches in France, while the women were home voting. And the emancipation was along property lines in Britain, not gender. Okay. Votes were described in terms of per household, not man or woman, and very often when the man was not present, the woman would place the vote for the family. The restrictions on voting in Britain arose out of property rights because when the Plantagenets, for instance, would grant large amounts of land, the barons would have to pledge with their lives the defense of that land. So they were as democracy arose in Britain and a parliament came onto the scene, those votes were granted to those who had pledged their lives. The same is true in the United States.
Don't you see, but by sort of dismissing and disparaging feminism and attacking feminism, you are attacking a sacred cow. It is something that many women hold dear because they believe it's given them the freedoms and the strength and the equality that they feel they believe. And so do you not see how it can be counterproductive?
40% of the women in the state of Indiana, the white women, the state of Indiana, belong to the Ku Klux Klan.
Where are we going with this?
Yes. Do you see what I'm saying? Feminism, the Ku Klux Klan existed in this country for close to 80 years before anyone started to question it. The same is true of and I'm talking about extreme feminism. No one is against gender equality. It's simply the feminists went back and rewrote history and made it look like men have been oppressing women. It's not true. We had disparate gender roles throughout civilization, the 5,000 years of known history of human civilization. Those disparate gender roles arose as a social contract. So it was true that women did not have all of the, let's call them, rights or privileges of men, but it was also true that men did not have many of the rights and privileges that women had. And what women see as rights were really responsibilities that men had, such as military service, working 15-hour days, just to support a family and things of that nature. To view history where men and women had separate gender roles in the light of today's modern society is quite foolish, and simply leads to revisionism that's neither accurate nor helpful to anybody in evaluating gender
Well,
roles.
John, I do appreciate talking to you. We've only got a very short amount of time left. Let's tie things up by going back to this trial.
Great.
What would a win for Johnny Depp mean for you?
I think the most important thing, I'm going to put aside the money. The money is a measure of what the jury might award, is a measure of how strong they believed Johnny. But I think a win for Johnny would say, yes, it's possible to challenge these lynch mobs that go after men simply based on accusations and the gossip in the media. Okay, that's the most important thing I think that would mean to me if Johnny prevailed.
And what about
I'm
if
really
Amber
against
Heard...
lynch mobs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah.
And what if Amber Heard is telling the truth?
If Amber Heard is telling the truth, then I think we have a situation where, at the very worst, Johnny shows that men can be victims of domestic violence, and we need to start protecting men's interest in domestic situations as well as women's, and with equal fervor on both sides, for both genders.
You don't think that if Amber Heard is telling the truth, Johnny Depp shouldn't
I don't.
public figure anymore?
I've seen enough circumstantial evidence to, and plus the strategies of her. I mean, I can read her trial lawyers like a book. I've been up against some of the best defense counsel in the world in courtrooms when I was a prosecutor, and I can read their strategies. They're hoping to confuse all of the issues to the point where the jury won't decide in Johnny's favor. But that's their only hope. I have yet to see in the discovery or in the witness interviews or depositions any evidence that circumstantially and objectively shows that Amber is telling the truth.
So there we go, another episode of Reporting Depp v. Heard. My thanks to John and Liz for taking part. My thanks to you for sticking with us this far. Don't forget, if you want to support the written work that I do, which kind of funds the podcast and kind of funds the YouTube channel as well, all you have to do is go to reportingdeppvheard.net/newsletter, and for a one-time only donation, you can basically keep funding my journalism from court. I'm at court every single day. I'm getting into court where I can. I'm live tweeting where I can, and basically spending far more time in the Fairfax County Court cafeteria than my waistline would like me to. Thank you very much for sticking around. I will be back with another episode tomorrow. We're going to have more of the forensic psychologist, Dr. Dawn Hughes, this time under cross-examination, and we'll see where that takes us. But until then, goodbye. Take care, wherever you are. Right, so there you have it. That was John. Very interesting conversation, I hope you would agree. And before that, my thanks to Liz for being my live park bench interviewee. Now, I just want to show you one shot, the deputy sheriffs disappearing on their big motorcycles. They do this every evening at around the same time, and I just about managed to capture it. So this is Deputy Jamie Smith, is one of the gentlemen who has kept an eye out on the journalists and most of the fans who've been in court, and he's quite a lively presence, and there he is, disappearing off into the distance. So thank you very much for sticking with Reporting Depp v. Heard. I will be back tomorrow. We're going to get more testimony from Dr. Dawn Hughes. This time she's going to be cross-examined as to the conclusions that she made about Amber Heard. If you want to support what I'm doing, I'd be very, very grateful if you'd sign up to the newsletter, because for a one-time only contribution, that will power my written work, as well as partly funding what I'm doing here outside court on YouTube and on the podcast. It's reportingdebtviheard.net/newsletter. That's all you have to do, and you can make a donation in any currency that you like, and I would be exceptionally grateful for it. Okay, so back tomorrow. Thank you very much for sticking with us this far. Whatever you're doing, stay safe, have fun, and gosh, there's lots more of this trial to come, isn't there? Bye-bye now.